Welcome to the Foundery, where leaders are forged daily. And now your host, George Roberts.
Welcome back, entrepreneurs. Today we welcome Mason Moreland, founder of Texas Vine Country. Welcome to the show, Mason.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, I really love your background because you and I actually share something in common. So many people know that I am a fully trained biologist, and I understand that you also have a background in biology. Tell us about your background in herpetology.
Yeah, so didn't go quite as far as you did. Can't call me doc, that's for sure. But originally thought I was going to be, an academic and have a real passion, still do, for herpetology. So for those of you that aren't familiar with that, that's the study of all things scaly and slimy. So your reptiles and amphibians. Been handling venomous snakes since I was like 12, but developed a real passion for like evolutionary biology, both the behavioral side and the genetic side. So did research in like genetics and behavior and morphology, so like color patterns and stuff like that on toads in Central and South America. Spent some time living in Panama by the Panama Canal, out in the rainforest, and done some research just with some lab samples and stuff like that. So if you ever need a real estate investor that can also design you a mitochondrial DNA primer, might be your guy.
Awesome. Well, tell us about that research in Panama.
So that was a very interesting time in my life. So I was in a program called the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. For those of you familiar with that, and it's primarily pre-med folks, but it encompasses a lot of different biological disciplines and pre-med type disciplines, and they fund all sorts of interesting research for undergraduates. And so my mentor was Dr. Jimena Bernal. She's now out of Purdue. She's an amazing woman. She's so smart, great herpetologist, and really just a behavioral ecologist. I don't want to pigeonhole her. She's a behavioral ecologist broadly, but came up with some cool projects to go do down there. And the primary one was looking at this toad that was just wildly differing. So you'd look at this toad and it's the same toad, but one's like brown, one's black with a red hourglass pattern on the back. Another one's gray. They look completely different, and basically trying to suss out like, why does this happen? What is the mechanics that pushes an animal to have such drastically different color patterns and like physical characteristics within a very small area? And then that led to some other projects, noticing like we talked about in the pre-show, the Panama Canal was flooded at, we know the day that it flooded, right? So there's an island out there on it with these toads on it. So you could tell, like, I know exactly how many days they've been cut off from this other population over here that they previously had access to, and kind of see what that does to the genetic makeup.
Yeah, that's awesome when you get those milestones in natural history. So where is that? Is it out in Lake Gatun?
Yeah. So the area that I was staying, drawing a blank on the city name, but it's it's basically like a tiny town out on the edge of Pipeline Road.
Oh,
past all the resorts a little bit. We got to drive past the prison to get out there where what's his name? Is it Noriega?
Yeah,
was being held. So that was kind of cool. So you got to see all the raised wire and you're like, what's up? Peace. Sorry about your imprisonment there. So, drive past that, we could go down to Lake Gatun and see, take the flashlight out and see all the crocodile eyes and stuff at night. It was a pretty cool place.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Canal zone is just an amazing place. So yeah, sometimes I do like to ask people what was their most fascinating job that they worked before getting into real estate, but I think we've already got an answer to that one.
That's probably it. Yeah, that one was it.
Awesome. Well, I love the fact that you are in Vineyard syndication, because I think a lot of our commercial real estate listeners are focused on multifamily. And I think that being in vineyards, or just being in agriculture in general, is a really great foil to multifamily because it's so different, right? You've got different holding periods, you've got different cash flows. This whole structure of the deal is different.
Are you ready to build passive income through investing in multifamily real estate? Take the next step by heading to www.horizonmultifamily.com and click Get Started to schedule a call.
Why don't you walk us through your progression? I think you started in single family homes, and then how did you end up syndicating vineyards?
Yeah, that's so first I started out chasing toads in the forest. So I graduated in 2012, graduated a little early. So I graduated in December, and literally in like that spring bought my first house, and was house hacking. So was renting another room to a friend, and developing kind of me and my dad and my brother together, like our master plan of how to develop our real estate empire. And back then it's pretty simplistic, right? You know, we were thinking like, do the rich dad, poor dad type thing, accumulate a bunch of these houses that cash flow really well, leverage, just pretty simple, right? And we got to this point where, we've got like 8 or 9 houses, and we realized that it's not as scalable as we probably thought it was before, especially when we're spread out over a huge state like Texas. You've got assets over in West Texas. Both the areas that we have in West Texas are like 2.5 hours away from each other. So, I mean, it's, you're talking long distances, 6-hour drive from one side to the other there. So it's not nearly as scalable as multifamily. So we started looking into multifamily and actually sourced a deal off market. My brother's a whiz at this, and he's actually a commercial real estate agent now, about to be a broker here in Lubbock, Texas. And we got to the physical due diligence phase, and I've talked about this a lot, but basically we got to the point where it was decide to buy it and keep it as is and cash flow it, but maintain an unsafe, unhealthy environment for our tenants, or really basically doze it and rebuild it. In my opinion, as a fairly experienced contracting type guy too, to make it safe and moral to have our tenants in there and make no money. And so we said, this deal is not for us. There's not a deal here for us. Our number one thing is to make sure people live well in our residential rentals. That's really, really important to us. So from there, at the same time, being a biologist, I'm still a W-2 environmental consultant. So I'm spending time out in the field, hiking through wetlands and stuff. And I'm seeing these grapevines everywhere in the state of Texas and wonder, why the heck are there no vineyards, right? There's hardly any vineyards out here, at least in my mind then. And then that's when I really started learning about them and making all those connections within my network to start growing who would now be my business partners and things like that.
Yeah, a lot of things I love in that story. First, I'm sure there are a lot of people out there wondering how to make these multifamily deals work. And there are these alternatives. There's triple net, you've got agriculture, there's other forms of industrial, which I think you've been looking at as well. And if you're in commercial real estate, there's no reason why whatever patch of the terrain you started out in that you necessarily have to stay there. But if you hadn't mentioned it, I was going to ask you why Texas, because people think of California for grapes, New York. There's a lot of states that I think are just jump immediately to mind for grapes. But Texas, I think, has a very strong story behind it.
Yeah, it really does. And one of the things I want to hit on too there that you mentioned before I answer that question is that real estate is a very unique space because anyone can get into it. And folks like, you and me, we come from a different professional background and have a lot of training and other things. And I think that's a great advantage in real estate because it allows you to see these other situations in real estate and potentially pull solutions that you've seen from completely different fields that other people don't necessarily think about. You're thinking about the world in a little bit different way. And that's kind of what really helped me is coming from a bunch of different things and applying those solutions to other industries. But yeah, Texas actually has a really long history in vineyards. Little known fact is that, Texas has one of the highest diversities of native grapevine species of anywhere on the planet. There's only, the Southwest U.S. has incredible diversity, and the Central U.S. has incredible diversity. And most of the current rootstocks, if you don't know, most agricultural permanent crops are actually grafted. So you have a rootstock plant that's grafted onto a scion wood plant. The scion wood plant on top is actually what produces the fruit and the variety. And the rootstock is actually what's adapted to the soil or diseases and things like that. Well, back in the 1800s, huge blight of, I think it's phylloxera. Yes, phylloxera. That was just annihilating French wine. It was a major issue. And what happened was some folks in the US in different places were working on, they figured out that you could graft them, onto native American species of grape, and then have some sort of resistance. And then a guy named T.V. Munson out of Texas realized these Texas species of grapes are incredible in providing disease resistance, adaptability to soils that European grapevines aren't suited to, and really opened the door to modern agriculture. So the first time I was in France talking about what I do, they were like, "Oh, well, that's hilarious because all those vines are French vines." So I was like, "Well, yeah, the top, but all the vines out here in France are all sitting on Texas roots." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" So I had to explain that. But yeah, we're not big on the scale of big, right? Vineyard wise, you look at California, 900,000 to 1 million acres. I mean, massive. You look at Texas, we're the 5th largest producing state, and we only have maybe 6,000 or 7,000 acres. So the scale is a lot different. But what that does, when you're looking somewhere else where all the big boys aren't, it's a niche, right? Just like everywhere else in real estate, it gives you opportunity to go disrupt.
That's awesome. And I'm glad you brought in the biological angle. I was going to ask you about disease resistance, and I was going to ask you about those big 5 producers. So I think the story that you were starting to tell is the big 5 of Bordeaux. So these people like Chateau Lafite Rothschild, who actually made it through the blight. Is that, am I telling that story right? Or maybe I'm not from the wine producing industry.
No, that's accurate. So it took out a whole bunch of folks over there in France, and the ones that ended up surviving were really the ones that were able to adapt and bring on some of this new technology for the time, which was rootstocks, and get over that hump, the mental hump of like, we're using American rootstock, right? That was looked down upon for sure. And if people knew about it broadly, it probably still would be. It's not purely French, it's not purely German, or it's not purely Spanish. It doesn't have that same feel to it. But in in the US, that innovation really opened the door for the US to even be a producer, because those diseases originated in North America. So they were brought back to Europe from all this contact and people bringing plants and soil back and forth. So we wouldn't have, we really didn't have much success growing traditional European or old world grapes here until that rootstock, that grafting was really developed and honed. And it was really developed and honed in France there at first, and then all the branching and innovation occurred here and allowed California, Washington, Oregon, New York, and now Texas to really develop their industries.
Wow. That's amazing. I just, I got to tell you, I don't know the history or the biology in any detail, but I do love wine.
Me too. And I will 0% claim to be a wine aficionado, snob, or expert. I am a guy that can tell bad wine from not bad wine. That's the extent of my tasting abilities, but I do love wine. And if any of your viewers have so this was me for sure. I was wine nervous. It was hard for me to go pick out a wine. I encourage everybody to just literally go to the store and just pick something you've never heard of. Doesn't matter if the label looks cool. Doesn't matter if you've ever heard of the region, but the more you try it, it's like listening to a new language, right? The more you hear, the more you taste in this case, the more you start figuring out like, oh, there's this flavor over here. I like this. I don't like this. There's this whole world out there. You just don't have to be afraid of snobbery. It's
Yeah, I was so wine nervous at first, trying to figure out how do I pick the right bottle of wine. It took me forever. I read books and books trying to figure things out and what's different. And I got to tell you, over time, it all began tasting at least decent to me, right? Now I'm drinking Concha y Toro. You know what I'm talking about?
no.
You go to Costco. Okay. I don't know if you got Costco in your area, but that's really big in the
Unfortunately, they keep
Midwest.
teasing us. They keep teasing us. They haven't come out here to Midland, but we have it back in Lubbock. So it's about a 2-hour drive for me.
Right. Well, over here, it's really big, and it's a Chilean wine, and they'll sell you a 1.5 liters. And I swear it used to be like $7.99 for 1.5 liters. And now it might be like $8.99. But that's, I think, something that's just really good. That's my table wine. So I totally got over the wine snobbery. I can recognize an amazing bottle of something like maybe like an Amarone. I will appreciate that, but I've come to realize I don't need to spend that much every day.
Yeah, there's this for those of us into graphs and stuff, there's definitely like this breakover moment for wine, right? It goes, you start really low in quality and price, and it goes up pretty drastically where you can find pretty good quality really fast for a little bit more. And then once you hit that kind of like $30 to $50 range, it sort of just flattens out and you're paying a lot more money and just gaining a little bit of incremental quality each time. Now there's some outliers way out there that are just, absolutely phenomenal, and they cost a lot. But, there's like an intersection where you get maximum number of quality for a number of dollars, right? And that's really where like our whole operation is, our whole mission on the vineyard and wine side revolves around being able to provide that. Because right now in Texas, like for pricing and value context for those of you that are familiar with wine or aren't, from a California wine, you can get a fairly good quality wine that you would be very proud to pour for a good friend or family at your dinner table for $15. It could be very, very good. And in Texas, that same amount of value is probably going to cost you about $50 to $55. And that really comes back down to the fruit price. So that fruit price for that $15 bottle of wine in California, you're looking at maybe $1,200 a ton of fruit, sometimes as low as $700 or $800 a ton, depending on the year, in the quantity. And in Texas, you're looking at like $2,500 a ton. So there's just no way we can keep up with that right now. And it all comes back to operations. It's the overhead expense. So the way we run things in Texas now as an industry, not us personally, but is very hand labor intensive, right? So you've got folks in there hand pruning, hand harvesting, hand desuckering, which is pulling little shoots off of the trunk of the vine, hand leaf thinning. So you're literally going in there with a bunch of people and pulling leaves off, hand cluster thinning. So you're going there with a little knife and pulling off extra clusters of grapes. It's super labor intensive. And everything we do as a company revolves around bringing a lot higher quality for a lot better price for Texas wines. And we do that through scale and mechanization.
Are you still able to keep some of that hand touch, the quality that you described?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what's been really incredible in especially California. They have done so much to advance the technology on the mechanization that the quality actually exceeds oftentimes hand managed vineyards, because you're able to use optical sensors and AI on some of these machines to prune at a rate that's quadruple or sextuple the rate that a hand pruning crew can do, and they can do it as good or better as far as accuracy of node length, and we can double yield. So your tons produced per acre can go from say 3 to 6 to 10 or 15 or even 20 tons an acre, and you can still maintain that quality level and sometimes beat it. Blind tastings in California have shown that with mechanically operated vineyards. Now you do still need human touch in there, right? You need to have somebody that's good at making the decisions on when, where, and how to do those operations. And that is where the key is.
Awesome. And I believe that leads into some of your other entrepreneurial ventures, the mechanization, that is.
Yeah, it does. So right now we're still working on building a custom crush facility. So this is actually like a co-packing facility. So they provide services, winemaking services for other wineries. It's called a custom crush winery. So you can do a la carte, anything from fruit processing all the way from, we'll source the fruit for you and bottle it, and then it just shows up ready for you to start marketing it at your winery. And that is also geared around that same concept. So we've got, almost everything's automated. You can run it with your cell phone. The winemaker can. There's minimal hand intervention. So we're really trying to model after that same ethos in our winemaking side as we try to provide more for our winery clients.
Awesome. Well, before we move on, do you have a favorite wine?
Right now, I think our favorite wine is Liotro. So elephant in Italian. I think it's Sicilian. And it's great. The quality of like the amount of value for it is really good. And we can find it pretty frequently in HEB. My current favorite Texas wine is actually a white. I really like Becker's Vineyard. It's just a solid Texas varietal there. And then sort of an up and coming favorite would be Gewürztraminer for Texas. So it's an Austrian grape, mostly Austrian white, and that's kind of up and coming. But favorite varietal here is Tempranillo, though. Spicy big red.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, my wife loves Tempranillo. She loves Rioja.
It's good stuff. And we nailed the Spanish stuff as far as it's our own style. It's got our own terroir, but almost any region in Texas, whether it's here or the Hill Country, we produce some pretty awesome Spanish varietals.
All right. So I think that for some of our audience, you're going to have to explain terroir.
Okay. So that's basically the grapes are very unique. To sum it up very shortly, in that the fruit actually takes on different characteristics with the exact same clone in different types of soils and environmental conditions. So you can actually taste that coming through into the wine based on the soil, the precipitation profile, the pH, and the heat during the day, and the change between the day and night. So you get different acidity levels and things like that. So it legitimately, you can have clone 11.1 Tempranillo on the same rootstock growing, in Spain. That'll taste not completely, it'll taste similar, but it'll have its own rhyme over here. And you can have the exact same grape and rootstock growing out here, and it'll taste different. Like it's all climate based. So it's very interesting, but that's called terroir. It's an expression of the earth there.
Right. And I think some of the fancier wine producers resent how easy it is in this modern world to transport those clones. And they'll say, well, you can't transport the sun and the soil. But anyway, I love American wine. And I think that it's not all about France and Italy.
No, definitely not. We have our own style of winemaking too. Most people, if you're going to like categorize old world versus new world's like very fruity, fruit forward, just like high fruit flavor, intense. And old world wines are typically more mellow, a little more blended flavored, fruit rearward, just a little bit different flavor profile. I like them both. So, like I said, I know bad wine from not bad wine, and I like all the not bad wine.
Love it. I love that approach. Yeah, I do love wine. I love all your choices there. Not big on the Gewürztraminer, but I've learned to appreciate that over the years. I've opened the palate a little bit.
I will say I'm a little biased because anything that grows well gets me excited because I'm a grower. So
fair enough. So then we did talk a little bit about comparing vineyards and agriculture to other types of deals. So first of all, what sort of I guess, is it even fair to talk about cap rates, because you're doing a lot of development? Maybe you should just explain, like, what do your deals look like, and how do they maybe compare to some other agricultural deals?
Yeah, so like a typical deal cycle for us is about a 1-year term. So we start at the beginning of the year with, our capital raising, progresses on from there to our land search phase, as mostly the cotton and peanut growers around here start to know what their crop's going to look like. They start gearing up to sell land and think about whether or not they're going to sell. Almost all the area out here is currently in row crop ag, either cotton or peanuts or sorghum. And towards the fall time period is when we're really sourcing all our materials. We've got our land under contract or purchased. We're finishing out our capital raise. And then in the springtime or late winter, we're installing everything, putting all the vineyard equipment in, ripping the land, that kind of thing. And then late spring planting, and then we're on to do it all over again for the next year. So our deal flow is really compressed by seasonality, since we can only plant for a little while out of the year. I don't know if you can hear this outside. Sorry, I've got a huge truck going down right outside. But yeah, that's typically what our deals look like, is compressed into about a 1-year cycle. We can only do 1 or 2 a year just based on how many skilled hands we have, right? We're planting like 300 acres at a time. So, you can only get so many people that know how to trellis and know how to do all this stuff at a time in one place. But, to compare it to, say, multifamily, I think that's like the cookie cutter. Most people are pretty familiar with that. You're thinking, you go in, you buy one, you do value add of some kind, maybe refi out some cash and hold it cash flow 5 to maybe 9 years at the high end, right? And sell it. Well, for us, this is an asset that lasts, 100 years. It could last a long time. And it takes 3 years to even produce a crop at all, 5 years to get up towards full production. So this is really a long-term play, and we're developing from scratch. So, the way we operate is based off of cash flow, right? So the attractive part of this for our investors is that the IRR, so the cash over time, is very similar to multifamily. You're looking in your low to high teens, in your teens there of IRR, but the cash flow, stabilized cash flow year to year, once it's established, is really high. And it has to be to make up for that initial 3 to 4 years of very little production.
And the deals that you're describing, these are all you're planting, right? So in no cases are you taking over an existing vineyard.
Correct. There's very few opportunities for us in Texas to do that, to take over an existing vineyard. And that's because of the way we operate. It's a double-edged sword. By being disruptive and doing something different for our area, in that it's mechanized operations and at scale. That's another key one too, right? You don't want to go buy $1 million worth of equipment and then have 50 acres. You want to do as much as can keep that equipment busy full time to maximally use that. There's very few vineyards that meet those criteria of A, being able to be mechanized, and B, having the scale to make sense for us. There's a couple, and we're always reaching out to them like, hey, is there any interest? But that's definitely not our main bread and butter.
Awesome. And then you mentioned this is something that can last 100 years or more. I think it depends on your type of vine, right? Like your Zinfandel, I feel that's something that's particularly long-lived and needs to be, right? You don't get the same from a newer Zinfandel that you would from an old vine Zin.
100%. So part of that too is with our philosophy, we're pushing high yields. That inherently does shorten the useful lifespan of that vine, right? It's going to start declining in quality and yield the older it gets, no matter what system you're in. You hit about 25 or 30-year-old vine, its yield is going to go down. That's just the way it goes. They age. So for our system of focusing on high yield and high quality, part of our underwriting, we build in these holdbacks out of our profits to actually anticipate replants so that we can continually upkeep the vineyard at the same yield levels ad infinitum. So in theory, we could go on forever just by retaining profits out of our cash flow and replanting. And that's the way we design it on purpose, because we want this to be, something that your kids can inherit the shares of, or their trust, or whatever.
That's awesome, because there's another distinction. Most people are trying to get out of their multifamily deals in 5 years, but this is something through replanting that you're able to actually maintain the level and the quality of cash flows.
Yeah, exactly. And, just like everything else in real estate, we plan for as many potential exit strategies as we can, right? That's the smartest way to go. The more exit strategies you have, the more ways you can profit in the future, depending on the situation. So we build our vineyards to the same sort of specifications and same style as the big boys out on the West Coast do. So they're very familiar with the way we operate, the scale we operate. So we're an attractive acquisition target, right? And they're all uniform across the board for what we do. So they all could be a package, they could be sold individually, things like that. So sale. We set it up so that it's very easy to refinance at the higher value that we've generated by development. Say in like year 8 or 9, when you've got some stabilized cash flows. So you can pull some tax advantage capital out like that and continue to cash flow it. And then, obviously you can just cash flow it as is and pay it off, and you're good to go and keep replanting ad infinitum. So we try to build it in where you can do a few different things.
Awesome. Yeah, again, huge contrast. And I think that's a major advantage for those of us that are in real estate for diversification. Easy to diversify as a limited partner, and definitely something I'm looking to do. I'd like to do an agricultural deal at some point. Now, your deals are also very different from, say, like fruit, which I think these fruit trees, well, actually, I believe they're a little longer lived. So you might have is it true you'd have a longer time to wait before the fruit is ready in most cases? But I think that, is it fair to say they live like 30 or 40 years for most of the fruit trees, or what?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate for most fruit and nut trees. So, you're looking at a much longer time horizon to get started, right? So like pistachios, for example, done a lot of research on those, almonds and olives particularly, but pistachios, you might take 7 to 9 years before you see, a stabilized crop size, and they're semi-annual, or biennial. So basically they produce a huge crop one year, they take a year off and produce a much smaller crop, and then they produce a huge crop the next year, all pending weather. But they can also live, pistachios especially, they can be productive for 70, 80, 100 years without replanting. So there's some advantages there, but the ROI, the actual cash flow numbers on those are a lot lower. So you're going to see more in line cash on cash return on investments on those fruit and nut trees with multifamily or less. You're talking like between 6% cash on cash and maybe like 10, maybe. And it takes several, 7+ years sometimes to get up to that level.
Wow. Well, I think that I'm definitely going to look into grapes instead.
Yeah, it's if you're in permanent ag, it's a little bit faster. It's about as quick as you can get and be permanent ag. But the yields are different too, right? It's all regional. Like the cap rates that you're going to see in large 300+ unit multifamily are going to be different in San Francisco than liberal Kansas. Like, I mean, it's, they're completely different markets. So if you're looking at, Napa or Fresno even, which is a pretty good cognate with our area, Fresno, and here, you're looking at land prices like $30K an acre versus 3,500. So they don't necessarily compare well on cash, even though they're the same asset class. You could be looking at grapes over here, and there's, in California, maybe it's 8% a year or less. And out here, we're looking at, 20s. So it's, it could still be a big difference.
Wow. A lot to think about there. Maybe I'd like to take a small pivot and ask you about your favorite wine story. Like for me, it would be, I'm a microbiologist. So it would be the Sauternes. But any particular grape or wine process that you find fascinating?
Okay, so two. I mean, I already mentioned one. It was TV Munson, who is based out of that north area north of Dallas, which for me is fascinating that was ever a hub for any kind of innovation in the wine world, considering there's probably less than 400 acres of vineyard in the area of North Texas. But the actual story of Primitivo and Zinfandel is absolutely fascinating to me. So there's this 3 variety complex, and it actually, I can't remember how to pronounce the name. I'm not great with Slavic languages, so I'll refrain from saying it. But there's a grape variety in, I believe it's Croatia, that's actually the parent variety of Zinfandel and Primitivo, and they're all just individual clones of the same variety, and nobody realized it for, I mean, literally thousands of years. It was thought to originate in I guess thousands, probably like 800 years, 700 years, something like that. It originated from a wild grape out there in Croatia, and then slowly spread across Europe, and everywhere it got named a different thing. So in Italy, it's Primitivo. In France, it's Zinfandel, but each one's its own clone. So it's got its own little rhyme to viticulture and winemaking, but they're all the same grape, and nobody knew for hundreds of years. And it's really fascinating to see the story once we started applying the genetic research to it.
That is cool. I'm always fascinated by that. As you mentioned, no matter where you grow the grapes, that terroir makes a big difference. And you've got all these things like Syrah, Shiraz, and totally different. Or let's see, I love Sauvignon Blanc, but the New Zealand, it's completely different, right? It's totally crisp. I don't taste a Sauvignon like that anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And, our Sauvignon Blanc is different than New Zealand. It's same clone, same rootstock potentially. And it tastes completely different. It's pretty wild. We're pretty bullish on Sauvignon Blanc. So we've got, I think, like 50 something acres right now in Sauvignon Blanc, and putting in another 30 something. So.
Well, I love to sail and I love seafood, and I feel like the two just go together. I love to eat seafood on my sailboat. And ever since then, I've just had a completely different approach to white wine. I felt like I moved past it and that I like red wine. But ever since I started sailing, that white wine, it makes me feel like I'm out by the water.
Oh yeah. And I mean, living in Texas, like by nature, I'm a big, gnarly, aggressive red wine lover, big dry red.
Yeah.
But man, when it's 105 out, and you've been outside pounding T-posts all day, or fixing fence, or, digging ditch for your irrigation system in your yard, or whatever you've been doing, it is really nice to come inside and have like a chilled glass of white wine. Man, that is so refreshing. Especially if you're having, like, for us down here, my wife's from Louisiana, shrimp and grits and some white wine. Oh man, I'm all about that life.
Oh yeah, that sounds good. Well, I'm with you on those big, full-bodied reds, like an Old Vine Zinfandel. That's one of my favorites. I love Sangiovese, Zinfandel. Those are the sorts of things that just really make my day. Well, anyway, do you like the story of Sauternes, or should I tell it? Because it's not going to be told on the story of the Foundery. If I don't, then go for it. It's a great dessert wine from France. And I'm sure you know, but I just love the microbiological angle to it, is that it gets covered with this fungus. And if you look it up, listeners or viewers, the fungus just looks awful. Just imagine somebody squeezing that and saying, like, why don't we just go through with it? Why don't we just see what happens if we take these fungus-eaten grapes?
Classic winemaking.
Let's just press them
and
ferment them, and let's go through all the trouble. And it turned out to be something just absolutely amazing. So that's like a double microbiological story. You're not just using the yeast to ferment it, but then you've also, on top of it, you've got this additional, a different type of fungi that are providing that very fancy flavor.
Yeah, it's really fast, and you are not joking when you say it looks awful. You're looking at this, you're like, done, whole season's over. And then if you don't know what you're looking at, right, that's what you're thinking. But if you really know what you're looking at, especially in those areas that get decent humidity and can develop it, your eyeballs start seeing dollar signs everywhere. It's just like, ooh, this is amazing. It's the wildest thing to me. The microbiology side of it is something that I am not as well schooled on. And I rely pretty heavily on our winemaker for that sort of knowledge. But it is funny because viticulturally, fungal issues are our main disease pressure. That's what makes it twice as expensive to grow grapes just 4 hours away southeast of here in Fredericksburg, in the hill country, where everybody thinks the Texas wine country is. Costs twice as much. You're spraying all these copper-based fungicides all year just to try to keep the grapes from rotting, essentially. And then you come up here and we've got 20% humidity and 15-mile-an-hour constant winds, and we don't have that issue. But we also can't do some of the other things like you're talking about. We're not going to get any of these royal fungi coming up and making these fabulous depth of flavors.
Well, yeah, maybe someday. We don't know. But yeah, wine is amazing. I guess I got to say, one of my favorite topics. I mean, in the East, right? You had tea. That's how people would have the ability to you boil the water to make it safe. And in the West, if you didn't have wine, you just wouldn't be able to drink the water. So
yeah, it's a nice, safe way. I love looking back at ancient recipes too. So I think we've already established this. I'm a guy that has weird, varied interests. And I love history and studied Latin for, I think, 6 or 7 years. And I love looking at their old Roman Republic era lifestyle. Yeah. And even Etruscan before them. And one of the things they drank was this like mulled wine where they take all these spices and add it in and sugar and juice and then like heat it up. And it was just like, it sounds so amazing. I'm like, I can feel like I'm there. And wow. It's been this cool thing that's been around for so many, thousands of years. Right. For Western culture. It's very much like that. It's ingrained in our being a little bit. It's gotten brought over to the North American continent.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's funny to think of it as something so practical. We think of it as something fancy, but my favorite quote, I think it's from the Roman era, where they said that only barbarians drink wine straight.
yeah, exactly. Like that's a lot. It's like people today that just, chug whiskey, it's like, that's weird.
But it's different. If you've been drinking it at a 1-to-3 ratio all day long, you're probably a little drunk already.
Yeah, exactly. I was reading something the other day so if you're into wine and want to just see like a cool newsletter of wine news, Louis Perdue has a fantastic e-newsletter. And he had one on there that was talking, it had like an old clip from France in I think the 50s. And it was like talking about healthy wine consumption should be limited to, I think, less than 1.5 liters per day per person or something. And to give you context, folks, most wine bottles are 2/3 or 3/4 of a liter. So that's like 2 wine bottles a day per person, I think. Yeah, this Louis Perdue Wine Industry Insight, that is my favorite wine news aggregator. So Louis does a great job.
Awesome. So I think that what we probably need to do is kind of bring it back in a little bit. I wish we would have had time to talk a little bit more about numbers and about syndication and the business end of it, but hopefully this was a great opportunity for our listeners to maybe take a break. Who knows, maybe some of them are drinking some wine right now, cooking with wine. Maybe they're even putting it into the recipe, as they say. The old joke, right? I cook with wine. Sometimes I even put in the recipe. But to take it back to business really quickly, right at the end, why don't you give us one of the books that has helped to forge you as an entrepreneur and as a leader?
Oh, man. So a lot. So I try to read a lot, typically with audiobooks though these days, because I think I've already told you this. I've got a whole mess of little girls. So my time is fairly limited. So I try to multitask as much as I can as far as when I'm doing something with my hands and reading. But 10X Grant Cardone has really been a big thing for me lately in the last couple of years. he's one of those guys that I think with most things you have to take with a grain of salt. Figure out what works for you and what doesn't, because there's a lot in that book that does not work for me and doesn't work in my system of operations, I guess. But some of the concepts in there are fantastic, and some of the mindset stuff is great. And of course, the Bible is always important for me, going back and looking at the moral side of money and business and things like that.
Do you have a quote for us?
From a book or from
the Bible.
myself?
So I'm just curious. I want to compare notes because I've got a favorite money quote from the Bible.
I have a favorite story. So my favorite story is, giving the money out to his servants, and as each one comes back with, has gone out and used the money to gain more money for their master, and then they get praised and get entrusted with greater responsibility by their master, and then the one comes back that has buried the money because I know you're a very budgetary minded, basically. I can't remember the exact words, but basically, you're a frugal man, and I wanted to make sure you didn't lose your money, so I buried it. And he's like, wicked servant, why would you right. take my money and bury it in a field? And I think that applies really great right now, because money sitting idle right now is losing you. It's a detriment to you. It's a weight. And I love that parable because that's what I want to teach my children. Money doesn't mean anything if it's just money. Go make it do something.
Oh my God. I love that from so many angles. I used to have to bring up the inflationary angle on my show, but now I don't need to do that. It comes out no matter what. The story of the five talents is one of my favorites in the Bible. But what springs to mind for me, the two would be, the first is from Psalms, see the man who is diligent in his labor, he shall stand before kings. And the other is the story about money and the root of evil, which is apparently not what most people have heard quoted, that the desire for money is the root of many evils. So at least that's the translation that I've been told is more correct. So that certainly puts a different shine on things.
Yeah. I love to look at money as a tool. Like, it's not going to do me any good when it's just being money that I've got, right? Unless I'm using it to affect some sort of end, it doesn't do me any good. I don't have any desire for money. What I have desire for, and this is going to sound really bad, I have desire for power. And what I can do with that power that money grants is I can help people around me. I can provide for my family. I can, unleash new opportunities for those that I care about, and do good around me. And that's super important.
I love it. Well, maybe we'll just end with a biblical angle, because your story reminds me of Acres of Diamonds by, I think it was Russell Conwell. And he talked about how, if I'm not mistaken, that was the book where he talks about how money, right, it's what we use to satisfy our desires in the world. And wanting a lot of money in some ways could just mean wanting a lot of what life has to offer. And that's a very interesting book by a pastor, which I would highly recommend. Acres of Diamonds, a real parable of persistence.
Love it.
All right. Anyway, thank you so much, Mason. An amazing interview, and look forward to getting this one out.
Man, always a pleasure sitting down and chatting with you, because I take the most pleasure in hanging out with people that are mentally highly stimulating, and you are always mentally very stimulating. You're a sharp guy, so it's always fun to chat with you.
Awesome, Mason. Thank you so much.
Thank you.